It started with a sound, the low rumble of a truck engine breaking the peace of our ranch. I remember standing by the fence, the evening sun dipping low across the fields, when the tires crunched over our gravel drive. It wasn't just the sound that got to me, it was the arrogance. That truck didn't belong here, and neither did the man behind the wheel. He wore a shiny badge on his chest, the kind you'd expect from a cop, but the way he looked at us, like we were intruders on our own land, told me something was off. My grandpa's hands clenched tight around the handle of his walking stick. He didn't say a word then, but I could see the storm building behind his old, tired eyes. The man had been showing up for weeks now. He called himself the HOA enforcer, acting like our ranch was subject to some rulebook we had never signed, never agreed to, and never even wanted. He parked his truck right in the middle of our property, like he owned the place, leaning against the hood, scribbling fake violations on slips of paper, and sticking them to our barn door. He wasn't even subtle about it. Once, he smirked and said, "I've got authority here. You step out of line, and I'll make sure you regret it." His words burned in my chest because I knew they weren't true. But he said them with such confidence, it made me doubt, even for a second. For Grandpa, it was different. Our land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was his life, his memories, his sweat pressed into the soil. This was the ranch he'd built with his bare hands. The place he raised his kids and taught me what it meant to stand tall even when the world tried to push you down. Every time that fake cop's tires dug deeper into the gravel, I saw another piece of Grandpa's pride chip away. He tried to brush it off, muttering, "Don't feed a stray dog or he'll keep coming back." But late at night, I'd catch him sitting by the window, staring at that truck parked out by our barn like it was a wound he couldn't heal. It all came to a head one Saturday. The morning was quiet, the kind of silence that usually made you thankful to live far away from the city. But then came the sound again, the engine, the gravel, the door slamming shut. The fake cop swaggered toward our porch, clipboard in hand, chewing gum like he owned the place. "Violation," he barked, sticking another slip on our gate. Grandpa rose slowly from his chair, his old boots creaking against the wooden boards. I swear the air shifted in that moment, heavy and still, like the world was holding its breath. "You listen to me," Grandpa said, his voice low but sharp. "This land ain't yours, and your badge don't mean a thing here. Take your truck and leave before I make you." The man laughed, a hollow sound that scraped against my nerves. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the cheap cologne mixed with gasoline. "Old man," he said, "you don't tell me what to do. This property's under HOA jurisdiction now. You're just too stubborn to get it." Then, as if to prove his point, he tossed his gum onto our porch, crushed it under his boot, and sauntered back to his truck. He left it there again, parked right by our barn, engine idling like a constant reminder that he wasn't going anywhere. That night, I found Grandpa in the shed. The old chain he kept coiled up for hauling logs was stretched out across the floor. His hands were steady as he oiled the links, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Enough is enough," he muttered, not even looking at me. His voice was heavy, carrying decades of grit and pride. For the first time in my life, I saw him not just as my grandpa, but as a man pushed past his breaking point. I couldn't sleep. The sound of that truck haunted me even in my dreams, a constant growl that wouldn't let me rest. By dawn, I woke to the squeal of metal. I ran outside, barefoot, the morning air sharp against my skin. And there it was. Grandpa, moving slow but sure, wrapping the heavy chain around the rear axle of that fake cop's truck. His old tractor stood ready, engine coughing but alive, like it too understood what needed to be done. When he looked at me, his face was calm. "Boy," he said, "sometimes a man has to remind the world where the line is drawn." And then, with a pull that shook the ground, Grandpa pressed the tractor forward. The chain went taut, the truck groaned, and the tires dug in deep, spitting gravel into the air. But it didn't matter. With a final roar, the tractor dragged that shiny pickup across the yard, wheels locked, metal scraping, leaving deep scars in the earth until splash. The creek swallowed it whole, water rushing around its tires as if the land itself was reclaiming what was ours. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. For the first time in weeks, there was silence on the ranch again. No truck, no arrogance. Just the sound of the water carrying away a trespasser's pride. The next morning, when the sun barely kissed the horizon, I woke to the sound of my grandfather's voice, calm but edged with steel. "He'll be back. Boy," he said, sipping his coffee as though he had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. Men like him, they thrive on intimidation. They don't just take once, they take until someone stops them. His words clung to me like the damp morning air, heavy and unshakable. By mid-morning, I heard the crunch of gravel again. That same black pickup rolled in, brazen as ever, sliding to a stop just feet from our barn. The man stepped out like he owned the place, dark shades hiding his eyes, a cheap badge hanging from his belt, and a smug grin plastered on his face. "Morning," he said, with fake authority as though we were trespassers on our own land. "I told you yesterday, HOA business. Don't test me." This time, Grandpa didn't move from his chair. He just leaned back, his weathered hands resting on his cane, and spoke in a tone that could cut glass. "You're no cop. You're no authority here. You're just a trespasser, and my patience is running thin." The man chuckled, ignoring the warning. "You folks really don't get it, huh? The HOA runs this whole area. Either play along, or life gets real hard, real fast. Now, unless you want fines stacking up, I'll park where I damn well please." And with that, he tossed his cigarette onto our gravel, grinding it with his boot as though he was marking his territory. I felt the heat rising in my chest, my fists tightening. But Grandpa's calm hand on my shoulder stopped me from acting out of anger. His eyes, though, told me everything. He was studying the man, calculating, waiting for the right moment. The truck sat there like an insult, gleaming in the sunlight. Hours passed. The man had walked off somewhere, leaving it on our land, bold and unashamed. Grandpa finally stood, his joints creaking, but his spirit unbroken. He muttered under his breath, "You want to test my patience? Let's see how far it stretches." He went to the old shed behind the barn, the one filled with tools from decades past, rusty chains, hooks, and everything a rancher might need. He pulled out a thick iron chain, the kind that looked like it could anchor a ship. He didn't say a word, but I could see his plan forming like storm clouds. We waited until the man had wandered down the dirt road, probably to hassle another neighbor. That's when Grandpa gave me the nod. Together, we hooked the chain around the axle of that shiny black truck. The other end, Grandpa hitched to our old tractor, an antique, slow and weathered, but with more raw power than most modern machines could dream of. The engine roared to life, coughing smoke like an old beast woken from slumber. My heart pounded. Was this really happening? Were we actually going to drag this man's prized possession off our land? Grandpa didn't hesitate. He slammed the tractor into gear, and the chain groaned under the strain. At first, the truck resisted, tires squealing against the gravel. But slowly, like a predator pulling down prey, the tractor overpowered it. The truck lurched, metal scraping, alarms blaring. Inch by inch, Grandpa dragged that arrogant man's symbol of authority across our land. I followed, watching as the tires tore deep scars into the earth, until we reached the edge of the creek. The water shimmered, calm and innocent, not knowing what was about to disturb it. Grandpa's eyes were locked on the path ahead, unflinching. "You want to park here? Fine. You'll stay here," he muttered. And with one final push of the throttle, the tractor pulled the truck over the bank. The splash was thunderous. Water surged up the sides, swallowing metal and glass. Bubbles, rising like the creek itself, was laughing at the man's arrogance. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the gurgling of water filling the cab. I stood frozen, both terrified and exhilarated. We had just declared war. Minutes later, the man returned, his face shifting from smug confidence to sheer rage as he saw the empty patch where his truck had stood. He ran, his boots pounding against the dirt, until he reached the creek. The sight of his vehicle half submerged broke him. His scream echoed off the hills, raw and furious. "You old bastard!" he shouted, pointing at Grandpa, his whole body shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Grandpa didn't flinch. He just stood tall, leaning on his cane, eyes steady. "I did what you forced me to do. You don't come on my land, and you don't threaten my family. That's your first and last warning." The man's rage turned to promises of revenge. "You'll regret this. The HOA doesn't forgive. You think you're tough, but you just made yourself a target. I'll bury you in paperwork, in fines, in lawsuits. I'll make sure this ranch burns with you in it." His threats spilled like venom, but Grandpa just walked past him, silent and unbothered, as though the man's words were no heavier than dust in the wind. That night, though, the house felt different. There was a weight in the air, a sense that the battle had only just begun. Grandma sat quietly, her knitting untouched, her eyes flicking toward the window as though expecting headlights to come up the drive at any moment. I lay in bed, restless, replaying the day over and over. We had struck first, but retaliation was coming. I could feel it in my bones. Grandpa sat by the fireplace, his silhouette sharp against the flames. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes still burned with that fire that no HOA could ever extinguish. "He'll come back," he whispered too. Himself, barely loud enough for me to hear. "But so will I." The creek outside gurgled softly, hiding its new secret under the moonlight. A truck, a symbol of false power, now lay at the bottom, rust already beginning to creep across its body. And with it, the first shot in a war that was about to test every ounce of our strength. The morning after Grandpa dragged the fake HOA cops truck into the creek, the entire town buzzed with whispers. Some said it was reckless, others quietly cheered. But for us, it was far from over. The truck sat half submerged in the shallow water, mud clinging to its tires. A humiliating reminder for the man who thought he could bully us. Yet the silence from him was almost louder than his threats. He hadn't come back, not a single word, not a single knock on our door. And that silence kept us on edge, because men like him didn't just let things go. I remember sitting on the porch with Mom that night, the cicadas humming in the dark. She held her cup of tea with both hands, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "This isn't done," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Men like that, they fester, they wait." I wanted to tell her not to worry, that Grandpa had handled it, that justice had been served in his own way. But deep down, I knew she was right. Bullies don't just disappear. They plan their revenge. Sure enough, 2 days later, we saw the first sign. A stack of bright orange papers was taped to our gate, flapping in the wind. Violation notices, they read. The fake HOA cop had scribbled down absurd fines: $500 for unauthorized fencing, $300 for unapproved vehicle storage, and $1,000 for illegal water use. My jaw clenched as I read them. He was trying to play sheriff again, hiding behind his fake rules and nonsense paperwork. Grandpa walked up, tore the papers from the gate, and crumpled them in his fist. "Paper don't scare me," he muttered. But I could see the flicker of anger in his eyes. Later that night, our kitchen table became a war council. Mom spread the fake notices out flat, smoothing the creases. Grandpa sat across from her, his jaw tight, his hands folded like he was bracing. Himself, he's escalating, Mom said. Dragging his truck into the creek wasn't enough for him to back off. Grandpa leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Good. That means he's rattled. And a rattled man makes mistakes. He paused, glancing at me. But this isn't just about him anymore. It's about us standing our ground. He wants us scared, and we're not going to give him that satisfaction. But fear has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. That night, we heard the sound of a truck engine idling outside the ranch fence. The low rumble carried across the fields, steady, taunting. We turned off the lights and peeked through the curtains. A black pickup sat just beyond the gate, headlights glowing like the eyes of some beast in the dark. We couldn't see the driver, but we knew it was him. He didn't honk, didn't shout, just sat there, reminding us that he was watching. After 10 minutes, he finally drove off. But the unease lingered long after his taillights disappeared. Grandpa didn't sleep that night. I heard him pacing the living room, boots heavy against the floorboards. At dawn, I found him sitting on the porch with his shotgun resting across his lap, his eyes fixed on the road. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. This ain't the first time I've dealt with men like him, he said, without looking at me. But it might be the dirtiest. His voice cracked just slightly, enough for me to realize that behind his anger was worried not for himself, but for us. The next day, the fake cop came back, bold as ever. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 men in cheap uniforms stood beside him, as if their matching badges made their authority real. They parked on the road in front of our ranch, scribbling on clipboards and pointing at our house. Unauthorized structure. One of them shouted toward us, "Non-compliant property." It was theater, nothing more than intimidation. Grandpa stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, the picture of calm fury. "Get off my land," he said, his voice carrying like thunder. But they just laughed, writing down more fake violations. As if they had power here, by evening the weight of it all pressed heavy on us. Mom sat at the table again, her hands buried in her hair, frustration spilling out in tears she tried to hide. "This isn't a life," she said. "We can't keep living under his threats." Her voice broke, and that was the first time I'd seen her truly scared. That was when Grandpa slammed his fist on the table. "Enough," he growled. His eyes burned with something fierce, something that made even me sit up straighter. He thinks he can bleed us dry with his papers and his trucks, but he forgot one thing. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. This ranch was built to outlast men like him, and I'll be damned if I let him tear it apart. That night, Grandpa made his plan. It wasn't about dragging trucks or tearing down notices. It was bigger, deeper. He started digging through old boxes in the attic, pulling out deeds, maps, and dusty files that hadn't seen light in decades. I watched him work late into the night, his glasses perched on his nose, his hands moving with steady purpose. Finally, he leaned back, holding up a yellowed document with a grim smile. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is what'll finish him." The next morning, while Mom and I fixed breakfast, Grandpa disappeared down to the creek. Hours later, he came back with mud on his boots and determination in his eyes. "He wants to play games with water and land," Grandpa said, tossing the old deed onto the table. "Then let's show him who really holds the strings." And in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. The fake cop thought dragging his truck from the creek was the end of it. But he had no idea that he'd just woken up the one man who could bury him with more than chains and mud. The sound of that empty driveway outside was almost too strange to take in. For weeks, that fake HOA cop's truck had been sitting there like a stubborn shadow, taunting us every time we looked out the window. Now, after Grandpa chained it and dragged it into the creek, all that remained was silence. But silence wasn't peace. No, silence felt like the pause before a storm, the kind that makes your skin crawl before the thunder even cracks. I kept glancing out, expecting him to pull back up, furious, demanding his truck. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I think I wore a path into the wooden floor just pacing. My little sister, Anna, stayed glued to the window, biting her nails, whispering, "What if he comes back with more people? What if the HOA finds out?" She was trying to sound calm, but her voice trembled. I wanted to reassure her, but the truth was, I had no idea what came next. Grandpa, though, acted like he had just finished mowing the lawn. He sat back in his old recliner, leaning it all the way back, boots crossed at the ankle, hands folded behind his head. "Boy won't be bothering us for a while," he said with a grin that made me both laugh and worry. That grin meant he wasn't scared, but it also meant he'd poked a hornet's nest. And we all knew hornets don't just fly away quietly. Bomb finally broke the silence in her own way. She slammed down the phone on the table after making a few calls, her face pale. "No reports filed yet," she said. "But when he realizes what happened, he's not going to sit quiet." She turned toward Grandpa, eyes narrowing. "You should have thought this through. What if he's actually connected to someone important? What if he comes back with the sheriff?" Grandpa tilted his head back, opened one eye, and said, "Then the sheriff better bring a tow truck big enough to haul something out of the creek." He said it like a joke, but his eyes flashed sharp. He wasn't careless. He was daring them to push us harder. The night fell heavy, the kind where crickets even seemed quieter, as though they too were waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. My heart dropped into my stomach. I peeked through the curtain, my breath caught in my throat. 2 trucks this time, both with high beams cutting through the dark, rolling slow down our ranch driveway. I recognized him instantly. Fake HOA cop standing tall beside the first truck, his posture screaming anger. He had 2 men with him, broad and mean-looking, arms crossed like enforcers from some old western. Grandpa didn't hesitate. He rose up from his recliner, grabbed the double-barrel shotgun he kept by the door, and walked outside before Mom could even stop him. I followed, my legs trembling but my chest burning with adrenaline. "You brought friends this time," Grandpa called out, his voice strong enough to shake the air. "But you're still trespassing." The fake cop stepped forward, his face red with fury. "Where's my truck?" he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "You think you can steal from me? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you?" Grandpa cocked his head and leaned on the shotgun like it was just a walking stick. "I don't care who you are. Your truck trespassed onto my land. My chain dragged it off. Creek owns it now." The man's fists balled up, his 2 buddies spread out slightly like wolves circling prey. Mom rushed outside then, her voice breaking. "Stop this. Can't just..." But Grandpa raised his hand and she fell silent. This wasn't about calming things down. This was about drawing a line in the dirt, a line that couldn't be crossed. The fake cop pointed at Grandpa, veins popping on his neck. "You're going to regret this. I'll have this whole HOA on your back. You think you can embarrass me? Drag my truck into the water like trash. I'll make sure your little ranch becomes worthless. No one will want to live here. I'll bury you in fines." My fists clenched so tight I thought my nails would cut my palms. I wanted to scream at him, but Grandpa beat me to it. He stepped closer, his voice low but heavy, like thunder rolling across the mountains. "Listen here, son. You show up on my land again, you won't have a truck to lose. You'll be walking home barefoot. And if you think your fake HOA papers scare me, you better ask around who built the water lines around here. Without me, none. of you get a single drop. That made the fake cop falter, even if just for a second. His eyes narrowed, calculating. He hadn't expected Grandpa to push back with that kind of power. His buddies shifted uncomfortably. Like maybe they weren't as convinced about backing him up now that the old man stood his ground like steel. Finally, with a loud growl, the fake cop spat at the ground and motioned for his men to follow. "This isn't over." "Not by a long shot," he muttered before climbing into his truck. The headlights glared one last time as the vehicles backed out of the driveway and disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was deafening. My chest was heaving like I'd just run a mile. Mom clutched Anna tight, her face still pale. Grandpa unloaded his shotgun and leaned it by the door again, as if nothing had happened. "Storm's passing," he said quietly. But I could see in his eyes he didn't believe that for a second. Inside, Anna whispered, "They'll come back, won't they?" Grandpa patted her head gently. "Maybe, but when they do, we'll be ready." I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glare, every threat. I knew this wasn't finished. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. Angry that someone thought they could walk into our lives and push us around. Angry that they thought Grandpa was too old or our family too small to fight back. And as I finally drifted to sleep, one thought burned in my chest like fire. If they wanted a war, they had just picked the wrong family. The next morning started. Off like any other on the ranch, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Grandpa was up before sunrise, sitting on the porch with his coffee. His old hat shaded his eyes, but even from where I stood, I could see the fire in them. The creek had swallowed the fake cop's truck, and the entire HOA board had been forced to watch helplessly. Yet somehow, I knew the fight wasn't over. People like them never took humiliation quietly. They plotted, they schemed, and they came back harder. I sat down beside Grandpa, the wood of the porch creaking under me. "You think they'll come back?" I asked. He sipped slowly, letting the steam rise into the cool morning air. "They'll come back," he said, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "But when they do, they'll realize they picked the wrong family to push." There was something about his calmness that made me feel safe, even though deep down I was nervous. Our family had faced struggles before: floods, droughts, and even financial trouble, but nothing compared to this kind of neighbor war. The HOA wasn't just trying to control us, they were trying to break us, to bend us under their rules even. Though we never signed up for them, by mid-morning we heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV rolled up slowly, stopping at the edge of our driveway. Out stepped the HOA president herself, Mrs. Kavanaugh. She was a tall, sharp-faced woman who always wore too much perfume and carried herself like she owned the entire valley. Behind her stood two men in suits, trying too hard to look official. Grandpa leaned forward in his rocking chair, not bothering to stand. "Morning," he said casually. Mrs. Kavanaugh's lips twisted into a tight smile. "Morning, Mr. Walker. I believe we have an issue to discuss." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. "Only issue I see is a truck in my creek. Yours, wasn't it?" Her smile dropped, replaced by a scowl. "That was HOA property. You had no right to damage it. You'll be receiving a fine." For Grandpa's laugh cut her off, sharp and unexpected. "A fine," he said. "Lady, this is private land. Your little club has no authority here." Her voice hardened. "We'll see about that. The HOA has lawyers, and if you think Grandpa stood then, slowly, deliberately." His shadow stretched long across the porch as he stepped closer. "If you think for 1 second that you can scare me with lawyers, you better think again. I've been standing on this land since before you even knew what a homeowners association was. My family built this ranch. My hands bled for it. And no paper pusher is going to take it away. The men in suits shifted uncomfortably, but Mrs. Kavanaugh didn't back down. She leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was delivering a threat. "This isn't over, old man. You've made enemies. You can't fight forever." Grandpa smirked. Neither could that truck. Funny how it ended up in the creek. With that, she spun on her heel, storming back to the SUV. The tires spat gravel. As they drove off, leaving dust in their wake, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They're not going to stop, are they? Grandpa shook his head. Nope, but neither are we. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, the sound of engines roared outside. I rushed to the window and saw headlights flooding our yard. At least 6 HOA members had shown up, their cars lined across our driveway, blocking the exit. Their voices carried through the night, angry, loud, threatening. Grandpa grabbed his shotgun, not to use, but to send a message. He stepped out onto the porch, the old wooden boards creaking under his boots. "That's far enough," he shouted. One of the men, younger and cocky, shouted back. "You think you can drag our truck into the creek and get away with it? We're here for payback." Grandpa pumped the shotgun, the metallic click echoing like thunder. "You step 1 foot closer to my house, and you'll find out just how bad your night can get." The crowd hesitated, murmurs running through them. They weren't expecting him to stand tall, unshaken. For a moment, I thought they might rush us anyway. But then Mrs. Kavanaugh's voice cut through the noise, sharp as a knife. "Enough, back to your cars. This isn't the place, not tonight." Reluctantly, they obeyed, the engines revving again as the cars peeled out of the driveway one by one. Silence settled over the ranch, heavy and suffocating. I turned to Grandpa, my heart still racing. "They're dangerous. What if they try something worse?" He laid a hand on my shoulder, steady and strong. "They're bullies. And bullies only win if you let fear guide you. But we've got something they don't: truth and grit. That's stronger than any rule book they wave around." The next day, Grandpa got to work. He started pulling old records, deeds, maps, everything that proved our land was free and clear of HOA control. He spent hours in his study, papers spread across the desk, reading glasses perched on his nose. I helped where I could, scanning through files and listening as he explained things. "This land's been ours since 1894, Kea said, pointing to an old deed written in fading ink. "No HOA, no outsiders, no one can take that away. They think they've got power because they make noise and write fines. But real power comes from knowing where you stand." As he spoke, I realized this fight wasn't just about a truck or a creek or even the HOA. It was about legacy. It was about a man protecting the heart of his family, the land that held our history, our memories, our future. That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Grandpa stood at the edge of the creek, looking down at the half-submerged truck. "It's just the beginning," he said quietly. "They want a war. We'll give them one. But we'll do it our way." And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The water churned loudly as the creek swallowed the fake cop's truck, dragging it deeper with each passing second. The headlights flickered under the surface like 2 dying eyes before vanishing completely. The crowd that had gathered, neighbors, ranchers, even the real sheriff, watched in stunned silence. And in the middle of it all stood Grandpa, his old boots covered in mud, his chest rising and falling like a warrior who had just finished a long-forgotten battle. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the sheriff broke the silence. "Well," he said, scratching his beard, "looks like justice served itself today." A few people laughed nervously, while others nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. This wasn't just about a truck being dragged into a creek. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could take control of people's lives. The fake HOA cop, drenched in water and mud, sat on the ground nearby. His uniform shirt was ripped, his fake badge bent out of shape. He looked smaller now, weaker, stripped of the power he once pretended to have. For the first time, he seemed like nothing more than a man caught in his own lies. Grandpa walked up to him slowly, his boots squishing with every step. When he stopped in front of him, he didn't yell, didn't curse. He just looked him dead in the eye and said, "This is what happens when you mess with family." I felt chills run down my spine. Grandpa's words weren't loud, but they carried more weight than anything else said that night. The fake cop tried to mutter something, but his voice cracked. He looked away, ashamed. "You've impersonated law enforcement, trespassed, harassed, and abused authority you never had," the sheriff said. "You're going to jail." The clinking sound of the cuffs snapping shut felt like the closing of a chapter. But for us, it wasn't just about him being taken away. It was about reclaiming our home, our dignity, and our peace. As the sheriff's deputies loaded him into the back of the cruiser, the neighbors who had gathered began clapping. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew. People clapped for Grandpa, for the stand he took, for the fearlessness he showed in protecting what was ours. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of relief crash over me. Grandpa didn't smile. He just tipped his hat and walked back toward the porch of our cabin. His shoulders were tired, his steps heavy, but there was a strength in him that hadn't faded. When he sat back down in his rocking chair, I brought him a fresh cup of coffee. He looked at me, his eyes softer now, and said, "Sometimes, son, the world needs a reminder that we ain't weak." I nodded, fighting back tears, because I finally understood the burden he carried all these years, standing between us and anyone who tried to harm our family. Later that night, when the crowd dispersed and the flashing lights of the sheriff's car faded into the distance, I sat beside Grandpa on the porch. The creek gurgled in the distance, carrying away the last remnants of the truck. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and for the first time in a long time, the ranch felt safe again. I leaned back and whispered, "You saved us, Grandpa." He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the land he had fought so hard to protect. Then he finally said, "This land ain't just dirt and water. It's our blood, our sweat, our memories. Nobody takes that from us." The following days were strangely quiet. No more strange cars parked by the fence. No more threats or harassment. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and the so-called HOA group began to scatter. Without their fake cop leading them, they had nothing. The sheriff made sure to patrol the area often, reminding everyone that the ranch was off-limits. Neighbors stopped by to thank Grandpa, bringing food, firewood, and even flowers. For the first time, the community felt united, not divided by fear. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Grandpa gathered the family in the living room. His voice was firm, but there was a gentleness to it. "We've been through hell these past months," he said. "But I want you all to remember something. We're not victims, we're fighters. And as long as we stand together, nobody HOA, fake cop, or otherwise, can break us." I looked around at my family, seeing the strength in their faces. We weren't broken. We were stronger than ever, but deep down, I knew something else. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of healing. Grandpa had reminded us that we weren't powerless, that we didn't have to bow down to people who abused authority. He had given us back our pride, our peace, and our belief in justice. And as the fire crackled that night, I silently promised myself that I would carry that lesson with me forever. The creek kept flowing. The ranch kept standing, and our family kept moving forward. But in the back of my mind, I knew this story wasn't over. Because people like that fake cop people, who think they can control others with fear, always come back in one form or another. The difference now was that we were ready. Grandpa had shown us that no matter what came our way, we had the strength to fight, to endure, and to win. The night ended with Grandpa humming an old country tune as he rocked in his chair, the sound mixing with the distant rush of the creek. It was a sound of peace, of resilience, of victory. And for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly, knowing that our ranch was safe. The air was cold and still that morning, almost too calm, like nature itself was holding its breath for a war. What was about to happen? The HOA's fake cop had crossed every line imaginable, and now he was about to face the kind of justice that wasn't written in their bylaws. My grandfather stood tall, chain in his hands, his eyes narrowed but steady. That old man had seen wars, floods, droughts, and the death of friends. Yet nothing shook him like watching some petty tyrant trample over his family's dignity. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about every insult, every night of restless sleep, every tear my mother shed when she feared losing our land. The creek gurgled in the background, like it too was ready to swallow what didn't belong here. Grandpa tightened the chain around the truck's frame and gave it one last glance. "This ends today," he muttered under his breath, his voice low but unshakable. When he started the tractor, the roar echoed across the ranch. The fake cop, who had arrogantly strutted around our property for weeks, suddenly realized this wasn't a warning, it was the reckoning. He rushed forward, his badge glinting in the weak sun, yelling, "You can't do this. This is HOA property." But the lie cracked in his voice. He wasn't a cop, wasn't even real authority, and in that moment, stripped of his disguise, he looked small, just a coward hiding behind a shiny piece of metal. Grandpa didn't even bother responding. With a slow press of his boot on the clutch, the tractor pulled forward. The chain went taut. And the fake cop's truck screeched in protest as it lurched toward the creek. Metal groaned, tires spun in vain, and the man's face drained of color. Neighbors had started gathering near the fence line, drawn by the noise. Whispers ran through the small crowd. Some gasped, some smirked. Some even clapped quietly, as if they had been waiting years to see someone stand up against the HOA's cruelty. My mother stood on the porch, her hands clasped tightly together, torn between fear and pride. I saw her lips move in silent prayer. And I knew she wasn't just praying for Grandpa, was praying that this was the turning point. The day the fear ended, the fake cop kept shouting, waving his fake badge, threatening lawsuits, arrests, anything he could think of to cling to power. But no one moved to help him. His authority had shattered in plain sight. People could see it now. He was nothing more than a bully in a borrowed uniform, using fear to control families who just wanted to live in peace. And when the truck's front tires finally tipped off the bank, splashing into the cold creek, the sound was like a heavy door slamming shut. It was done. The water rushed up against the metal, swallowing the fake cop's pride along with it. He staggered back, shaking his head in disbelief, while neighbors laughed, clapped, and even cheered. But Grandpa wasn't done. He parked the tractor, unhooked the chain, and walked straight up to the fake cop. Every step he took was slow, deliberate, the steps of a man who carried the weight of generations behind him. He stopped inches away, looked the man dead in the eyes, and said, "Don't you ever set foot on my ranch again. You're not law. You're a liar, and liars don't belong here." The silence that followed was deafening. The man didn't reply. He couldn't. His lips trembled, his hands shook, and for the first time, he felt what it was like to stand on the wrong side of true justice. In the days that followed, the HOA scrambled. Without their fake cop to scare us, their grip on the community loosened. Neighbors who had been silent started speaking out, filing complaints, demanding answers. Investigations opened, and soon the truth spilled out like floodwaters breaking a dam. The fake cop wasn't just pretending, he was breaking federal law, impersonating an officer. The HOA board, who had backed him, was exposed for their corruption. Fines, lawsuits, resignations, they crumbled under the weight of their own lies. And us. For the first time in years, we breathed easy. My mother slept through the night. My father walked the ranch with a smile that had been missing for too long. I sat by the creek with Grandpa, watching the water rush past the half-sunken truck, now rusting into nothing. He sipped his coffee and said, "You see, boy, sometimes you don't fight fire with fire. Sometimes you fight it with water." He chuckled at his own joke, and for the first time, I laughed with him. It felt good. It felt like healing. The fake cop never came back. The HOA, once feared, became a joke. And our family. We grew stronger, not just because we had one, but because we had faced fear together and refused to bow. Grandpa became a legend in the community, the man who chained a truck and dragged it into a creek to defend his land. But to me, he was just Grandpa, the man who taught me that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears old boots, carries a chain, and drives a rusty tractor. And that, I realized, was more powerful than any fake authority could ever be. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was simple, solid, and unforgettable. And on that cold morning by the creek, justice finally came home.